big picture with the Schwab team. Mr. Jeff Kleintop and Mike Townsend with me this afternoon. Jeff is the Chief Global Investment Strategist and Mike's Managing Director of Legislative and Regulatory Affairs. Afternoon, guys. Great to have you. Mike, get us started here in the world of D.C. and obviously the election. What's new for you since we last spoke?
Well, Oliver, the biggest commodity in Washington right now, jet fuel. The Congress is wrapping up its work. They are desperate to get out of town and head back to the campaign trail. So both the House and Senate expected to pass a bill tonight that will extend government funding through December 20th, averts a shutdown that could have happened next week, wraps up their business pre-election. They'll have a tricky debate to fund the government when they come back and face that new deadline after the election. But that is certainly the driving force right now. Everybody wants to get back on the campaign trail because obviously this is such a close election, both at the presidential level and at the congressional level. Okay.
All right. So they're ready to get the jets flying again. Get out there and get the word out. Jeff, in terms of the catalysts for international markets, I know that earlier this year we had a few sort of political events, elections in Europe. Is there anything policy-wise that's imminent in your domain?
Well, I guess speaking of politics, the shutdown I'm watching out for on October 1st isn't the government, it's the East Coast ports. This could have global implications. That's when we get the expiration of that 6-year labor contract for more than 40,000 longshoremen across the East and Gulf Coast ports. Shipping costs have been falling rapidly for East Coast ports in the last week or so on the chance ships will not be able to unload there. They'll have to sit and wait like they did in Long Beach and Los Angeles back a couple of years ago. The Port of New York and New Jersey combined to be the second largest by volume, but you're talking about a lot of ports here. And if ships can't get unloaded, it could affect about $2 billion per day in trade flows. A lot of agriculture, a lot of other goods as well, at a key time when retailers are beginning to stock up for the holidays.
So that worsens if there is a shutdown, but it seems like there's already some stresses. It seems kind of building already with labor, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is something that's been going on for quite some time. Obviously, it's a political issue as well as an economic one, and we'll see what happens here as we get to that deadline on the 30th. I'm anticipating if there is a shutdown, it's a fairly short one. Already, we've seen importers front-loading some of their shipments, meaning bringing them in early or diverting them to the West Coast in anticipation of a strike. But if we're talking about a 30 to 90-day strike, it could be a much more important economic issue. You know, we're always really focused on these supply chain issues, particularly right now when we've got questions about growth and inflation.
Also, with China trying to stimulate, taking extra measures, get us started on that subject. Definitely want the policy side on kind of how the candidates might deal with the China if it does kind of re-strengthen. But Jeff, from the market world, obviously this was a pretty big deal yesterday. We're giving back a decent amount of it, but what impact does that have on potential for either inflationary forces or just growth in general?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the People's Bank of China cut their main policy rate today, kind of a follow through on the stuff they announced yesterday. It's the 1-year prime rate now cut to the lowest it's ever been, well, ever going back to 2016 when they started using this policy rate. A little bit of bump in the Hang Seng today in Chinese stocks following yesterday's big gain. I think the question here is, does this start to change the dynamic between the dollar and China's currency? Doesn't seem to. We're not seeing much of a move here. And I think that was one of the concerns if China were to do some aggressive easing, would their currency plunge and could that become an election or political issue? Doesn't seem to be the case. In fact, the currency seems to be holding up versus the dollar here lately. So we'll have to see what happens for the markets. We've seen 20% rallies on China's stimulus before in Chinese stock markets, only to have it fizzle. I'm in the camp that this one could fizzle as well unless we see some real follow through on the fiscal side.
Okay. Thinking about China and rates, firstly, my kind of a two-parter is, one, does the number of, if more global central banks are cutting rates, does that give some cover for Powell to avoid the political insinuations? Or is the right just going to, throw those at him anyway? And then number two, I mean, when we think about Chinese potential, how far can it go if both candidates want to smack tariffs on them, et cetera?
Yeah, well, first of all, on the rates, Oliver, I think you're probably right. The fact that, it's moving all over the place probably gives him some cover. Look, it's close to the election. You're always going to get that kind of commentary this close to an election. Of course, the next meeting for the Fed is the day after the election. Incredible sort of circumstances there. They meet November 6th and 7th, of course. We'll probably still be counting votes at that point. So that'll certainly be an interesting dynamic. And on China, as Jeff knows, the tariff subject is really dominating the conversation on trade issues. With Trump, talking about not only an across-the-board tariff increase on everything, but an even larger increase on Chinese imports, up to 60%, in some cases beyond. So, I think that's going to continue to be a huge part of what he talks about. He talks about it all the time on the campaign trail. He talks about it in the context of all sorts of things that he's going to pay for with it. And of course, economists have very different views on exactly what the impact of that will be and potential inflation. So I think this is going to continue to be one of the hot button issues over the next 6 weeks before the election.
Like that. And we could use some issues, some economically centered ones. Any new clarity on policies? I know a few little items have been floated there about different kind of various tax breaks. What's new on that front, Mike?
Yeah, both candidates have actually made a lot of comments recently on tax policy. You have Harris, who's been talking about first-time home buyers and small business owners and newborns. You have Trump has been talking about ending the tax on tip income, ending the tax on overtime hours, which a lot of people don't even know how exactly that would work. And I think the real theme here, of course, is that the president can't just change the tax code, right? This is going to be Congress that does it. So a lot of these are sort of thrown out, I think, to different constituencies as part of a campaign strategy. But this is all going to have to be hashed out in a very, very difficult negotiation in 2025 on taxes. So, we're a long, long way from any of these things becoming reality. I think there's sort of an over amount of attention being paid right now to these kind of general statements, don't have a lot of specifics. And like I said, ultimately, Congress is going to have to figure it out.
Speaking of tough negotiations, real quick, I got one other item. It's part of me, it seems ridiculous to ask this, Jeff, but the other part of me, I'm trying to be fair. When Trump says that he'd be able to end Ukraine versus Russia before he even gets in, if we think about like black swan events, that would obviously be massive for like the whole European economic complex if that stopped or simmered or however you define it. Is there any sign of any of that being priced in at any degree anywhere, Jeff?
No, I'm not seeing that. And in fact, you're seeing basically a status quo outlook for the conflict. And, sometimes that's what these are. But, you're not seeing that energy prices, you're not really seeing it in other commodities that will be very sensitive to these types of movements, particularly some of the grains in Europe. We know, Ukraine's a big supplier of some types of grains, and then energy itself. So no, nothing that would suggest that this is going one way or the other anytime soon.
Great answer. Hey, Mike, real fast. Danny Kirsch at the top of our show, our trader guest, was telling us to buy long financial calls, the sector for a possible Trump win. Do you think that's a way to express that? And does it apply to the opposite? Do you fade financials if the party in power stays? Or what do you think about that trade?
Yeah, first of all, Oliver, as you know, I think this race is just crazily close. I don't think there's really much you can do given how close it is. You're looking at some of these polls. The average poll in North Carolina right now is 0.5 points margin. It's just incredible how close this is. So I've been telling people to be really cautious about trying to make any kind of move that says, if this outcome happens, I'm going to do this. If this outcome happens, I just think it's so hard to know right now. I think we're going to be at this very close a race all the way through the end. So, I'd be kind of wary of making any calls that, hinge on a particular outcome right now.
I hear that. It's basically just, you're flipping coins. Like, all right, you want to go flip a coin? Flip a coin. That's fine. If that's how you want to trade it, that's how you want to invest. But that's pretty much what it is. You're flipping a coin. Thanks, guys. Great stuff. Jeff Kleintop, Mike Townsend.